What, I don't know if you're the right person to comment on this, but the question that I always have when I see local option programs is, what are the downsides? Where are the unintended negative consequences? Because that's usually what's there. Doesn't mean that the thing can't be a net positive, but what are they?
Okay, well, if I were to look at the different requirements, you have an as-of-right zoning for renewable energy, R&D, manufacturing, or R&D, manufacturing, or deployment. Now, some communities could say, geez, we don't have a place we want to do that, or we don't want to have the risk of making an as-of-right zoning and have somebody come in and put in something we don't want. That's a reasonable thing to look at. The path that we have chosen, thanks to the suggestion of the planning director, is by fulfilling that requirement at the RTS, where we're actually looking at doing some renewable energy, we retain control. So there is no risk of a developer coming in and doing something we don't want. So that could be one risk. Reducing energy use by 20%, I find it hard to see a downside to doing that. If you can't, you can, but I find a hard time to see a downside doing that. The stretch code, as I said, I think on the commercial side, that's what people are doing. We'll be getting there anyway. On the residential side, I think Mo raised some questions that what you'd like to do is look at how it's going to work, so that you have a chance to say, okay, let me just understand what's it going to mean for people, because the bottom line from the analysis that's been done and the projects is that for a resident choosing to do this, to follow this code, they are going to be saving money. They're going to spend less on energy than they would if they built to the standard code.
Okay, but let's
They have to do more work, so I can't answer what the downside of that is.
Yeah, the downside, on the upside, under the current code, you can do these other steps, but it's optional. Mm-hmm. And that's, as you've pointed out, in a lot of commercial construction now, things that go beyond the code in order to provide reduced life cycle costs or raise energy efficiency are being done by the developers for their own economic benefit. But it's an extra step to say, we're going to require everyone to take these steps. Yep. And usually the people that have the problem aren't the people that would have done it anyway. They're the people that wouldn't have done it if they didn't have to. And I guess, particularly with the amount of time that the members of this board have had to devote to questions about how we do our permitting and regulating and supervising of the development process around here, both residential and commercial, and the frustrations of the individual property owners have with the current code and its ambiguities. Are we exacerbating that by going to this at this point when it really would become a code that is not applicable statewide?
I would answer that in a couple of ways. First of all, it will effectively become a statewide code in several years because the 30% reduction is going to be instantiated in the IECC 2012 code, which we as a state are legally required to adopt. In fact, on the commercial side, what we have done in the stretch code has been adopted by the IECC to put in their 2012 code. So I think the recognition at the national level is that we've done a pretty good job in doing this. I made a point about the performance-based code. It's very similar to the discussion I remember having with the folks at DESE from a school committee perspective about audits they make us go through. So, we spend a lot of money and time on these audits, and, we pass them. We were never going to pass them. We get no value out of them. And it's the same thing here. When you do a code that will actually measure the energy use of the building built as to spec and be able to tell you, you know what, you got it right, and yes, you are going to save that money, that's real value in mandating something like that, because it helps the homeowner get what they effectively paid for. From what I've heard talking to folks at BBRS, there are builders now who are actually doing 2 of these ratings. They're picking up the cost and putting it in there. They do one before they close the walls to see if they've done anything wrong. They actually check to see the results, and then they do the required one at the end of construction, which is required to meet the code, because they feel like this is going to give them an edge. Spending the additional to do the rating in mid-construction allows them to correct problems. So I think it's fundamentally a different kind of code. It gives the ability for the homeowner or the property owner to make choices. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, yes, it mandates it, but it gives them the flexibility. It's not about specifying a list of 42 things you have to do. It's about saying, if you want to reach this by having incredibly energy efficient windows and a really high performance heating system, go ahead. If you want to do it by putting more insulation in your walls and ceiling, go right ahead. It's target based. And I think that's the kind of smart regulation that builders and owners and architects and others appreciate, because it's helping you get to where you want to go. Because as a homeowner, you want a house that's comfortable and energy efficient. So I think it's actually a much better way of looking at it than a lot of the standard code stuff, where you just have to meet certain requirements even if you don't understand them.
It's got a lot of positive points to it. I think I'm probably where I think I heard Mo commenting in the sense of, I guess I would want to have some further look at this, and particularly to have some of the people that are looking at that be the stakeholders who see themselves as having possible problems if we adopt this. I mean, for example, there are things that we can just chug away at. We've worked on reducing our energy consumption. Is it realistic for us to set a target of 5%, of going another 15%? If so, I'm willing to work on that, but I'm not ready to promise it ahead of time till I know that that's doable. And then with the private developers or private parties that are going to be affected by this, I'd like to know, and by the departments that would be affected by this, I'd like to know. So, anyway, thank you.
I think it's clear that we have more work to do on this, and
Okay.
and I think that all of the questions that have been raised at this table are good questions. That my hope is that we will proceed forward and answer some of these questions, get community buy-in. With that in mind, what I'd ask Kate is, what are the next steps? What do you see as our roadmap?
Well,
And before you comment, let me also say, Dan, that the beauty of us being at this state in this process, early stage, is that there are 58 communities that have come ahead of us. So that's tremendous information that is out there, as opposed to us being the first one. So which
I'm
I look.
interested to see how it plays
I am
out.
too.
And I guess I would say there are things in here that are targets, or there are things that private enterprise in town are already doing, and that's great. Whether or not you want to lock yourself into it, the number of dollars, all that's really there, other than the psychological or political benefits, is the number of dollars that you're going to get in increased funding. And you got to see if that's going to match up with something that you need to do, and how much that's going to be, and how much work it's going to take to apply for those, and to deal with compliance issues as you come along. I think there's a lot to be said for seeing how it works out in some of the other communities. Maybe exactly as Mike is saying, if the code is going to go this way statewide, what difference does it make?
Right, then
On
we've
the other
already
hand,
accomplished
if there are
it,
people
yeah.
that have some problems with the way this thing is being implemented, it would be interesting to see what those are and how they address them.
Kate? Jerry?
Yeah, I just want to say that I don't think the debate here is all about the state grant money, because that's not enough to make the commitment. The debate is, will this be a help to the town, to its citizens, to its businesses, and to the town government itself? And I think that's what we have to look at. It isn't a question of the grant money, that may be there, it may dry up, but it looks to me like that this could be an advantage to us to take these steps. If we can find a way, obviously, to save 20%, we're going to be in much better shape. So,
And I agree. Now,
I think to that point, what we're talking about is a cost-benefit analysis. And so we're just looking at philosophically, we believe that this is a way to move forward. We need real criteria. One of the things, Michael was able to speak to us tonight for 15 minutes. Michael could speak to us for 5 hours on his experience and the things that he knows. And one of the things when we had met in the chair and vice chair meeting was talking about clarity about the stretch code, what exactly that means, how it's implemented, and what its impact is. So I think all of those things are going to figure into how we move forward on this, and it's a real cost-benefit analysis.
And there are a lot of resources. The state is investing resources. They have provided training, and they will continue to do that because they want to encourage and support communities that choose to do this.
and now, I'm sorry, Kate. Now we'll go to Kate.
well, one of the ways that the board has handled issues like this in the past is to pull some stakeholders together in a working group to, I would say, probably target the stretch code issue particularly. I think that Michael has outlined the other categories. They could be they'd be easier for the staff to give you feedback for the board to consider. The sighting issue and the low-emission vehicles is something I think that's it's a little easier for us to get our hands around. But perhaps a working group with stakeholders, I think commercial development, residential development, energy and somebody who specializes in energy, architect, designer, facilities people, something like that to look at the stretch code, maybe look at what's happening in some of the other communities that are actually implementing, and particularly on the residential level. I think that the concern on residential is that people who tend to do a remodeling or renovation of their house are not necessarily starting out to do it to save energy. So, you know, if we were to go in this direction, we need to make sure that what would be additional dollars spent, which could save them long-term and save the use of energy, is part of the educational process when they start thinking about doing a project. So all of those things I think need to be looked at, because it's really the residential community that comes to remodeling and permitting from their other daily life as opposed to it being their business. So maybe board could consider a charge for a small working group and a composition in one of your next meetings in December or so.
In the meantime, that would be fine, if you could just put together some ideas on that. Michael, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Uh,
Appreciate your time.
Yep.